A CCTV camera inside the private yoga studio records a pregnant woman and her instructor seated on adjacent mats, knees nearly touching. He leans forward to correct her posture, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. She shifts closer, accepting the contact without hesitation. When the session ends, they stand near the doorway, his palm resting at the small of her back, her head angled toward his shoulder before they separate. She knows she has been cheating on her husband for months. What she does not know is that this same betrayal will become the reason for her death. Ryan Mitchell, owner of Peak Performance Fitness in Aurora, Colorado, discovered the same footage on the 7th of February 2023 during a routine security audit. The boutique gym specialized in private training sessions, and Mitchell routinely reviewed recordings to ensure facility protocols were being followed. What appeared on his screen that Tuesday afternoon wasn't a policy violation in the traditional sense. The footage showed a pattern of meetings between two members in the private yoga studio, meetings that grew increasingly intimate over the course of 3 weeks in January. Mitchell recognized both individuals immediately. One was Melissa Harper, 34, a marketing consultant who had enrolled for private sessions in mid-December. The other was Lucas Reed, 29, the contracted yoga and mobility instructor who worked out of the studio 3 evenings per week. The recordings showed nothing sexually explicit, but the body language told a clear story. Prolonged physical contact during assisted stretches, embraces that lingered well beyond professional boundaries, conversations conducted with faces inches apart and hands intertwined. In one clip from January 24th, Lucas stood behind Melissa during what appeared to be a hip flexibility exercise, his hands on her waist, their bodies pressed together. In another from January 31st, they remained in the studio for 40 minutes after the scheduled session had ended, sitting close on the floor mats, Lucas's arm around her shoulders. Mitchell had been in the fitness industry for 12 years. He'd seen inappropriate client-trainer relationships before, though never at his own facility. He considered confronting Lucas directly but decided against it. Instead, he saved the footage to a separate drive and made a note in his daily log. He would need documentation if the situation escalated. He didn't realize how quickly that would happen. Melissa Harper had built what appeared to be an enviable life in the Southlands neighborhood of Aurora, a suburban development 20 minutes southeast of downtown. She worked as a marketing consultant from a home office, managing client accounts for Denver area startups and a national wellness brand. Her Instagram account, with nearly 4,000 followers, featured carefully curated posts about fitness progress and professional milestones. She documented her workouts with mirror selfies and motivational captions. Daniel Harper, her husband of 6 years, maintained almost no online presence. Colleagues at Frontier Commercial Group, where he'd worked as a project manager for 5 years, knew him as disciplined, punctual, and emotionally reserved. He managed multi-million-dollar real estate developments across the Denver metro area, arriving at the office at 7:30 each morning and leaving by 5:15 unless a site visit required evening hours. The Harpers had met in 2015 and married in 2017. They'd purchased their 2-story colonial in early 2018 and talked about starting a family, but the conversation shifted from when to if over the years. By 2022, they were actively trying. Their routines rarely overlapped during the week. They ate dinner together, perhaps twice per week, and hadn't taken a vacation together since 2021. When Melissa announced her pregnancy in September 2022, the response from friends was uniformly celebratory, though some had noticed the emotional distance in the marriage. What Melissa confided to her mother and a close friend was that she felt lonely in the relationship. Daniel was dependable but emotionally absent. Their intimacy had become perfunctory, scheduled around fertility windows rather than desire. In a text message from November 2022, Melissa told her friend she felt like she was living with a roommate, not a husband. The 911 call came in at 6:17 a.m. on Wednesday, the 8th of February 2023. The caller identified himself as Daniel Harper and provided his address in a steady, controlled voice. He reported that his wife, Melissa, was unresponsive in their bedroom. The dispatcher, following standard protocol, asked if he had checked for breathing. Daniel said he had. She wasn't breathing. He checked for a pulse. There was none. The dispatcher asked if he was willing to attempt CPR. Daniel said he didn't think it would help, she'd been cold to the touch. The dispatcher instructed him to begin chest compressions anyway and stay on the line. Daniel complied without argument. Paramedics were dispatched at 6:19 a.m. and arrived at the Harper residence at 6:31 a.m. Lead paramedic Jason Torres and his partner, Amanda Price, entered the bedroom to find Daniel kneeling beside the bed, hands still positioned for compressions, though he'd stopped the effort. Melissa lay on her back beneath a white comforter, arms at her sides. Torres checked for vital signs and found none. Her skin was cool. Torres estimated she'd been dead for at least 4 hours, possibly longer. He called time of death at 6:34 a.m. and notified dispatch. The Aurora Police Department's Major Crimes Unit was alerted at 6:41 a.m. Detective Karen Alvarez had been with the department for 17 years, the last 9 in homicides. She'd worked everything from gang shootings to domestic murders to cold cases pulled from storage. She arrived at the Harper residence at 7:52 a.m., accompanied by Detective Marcus Liu and a forensic team from the crime lab. Daniel met them at the door. He wore gray sweatpants and a faded University of Colorado t-shirt. His hair was uncombed, his face unshaven. He appeared fatigued but composed, his voice flat and mechanical as he recounted the morning's events. He'd woken at 6 o'clock, he told Alvarez. He'd reached over to check his phone and noticed Melissa was lying unusually still. She normally shifted in her sleep, curled on her side or sprawled diagonally. This morning she was flat on her back, arms straight, face pointed toward the ceiling. He'd spoken her name, no response. He'd touched her shoulder. Her skin was cold. That's when he checked for breathing and called 911. Alvarez asked where he'd been the previous night. Daniel said he'd worked late at a commercial site in Centennial, about 25 minutes south of Aurora. He'd left the site around 7:45 and stopped for takeout at a Thai restaurant on South Parker Road. He'd arrived home at approximately 9:30, eaten dinner while reviewing project documents on his laptop, then gone upstairs just after 11. Melissa had been in bed reading when he came up. They exchanged a few words. She said she'd had a yoga session earlier that evening and felt tired. He'd assumed she meant physically tired from the workout. He hadn't thought anything of it. They'd both fallen asleep shortly after. He didn't hear anything unusual during the night, no sounds, no movement, nothing that would have woken him. Alvarez listened without interruption, then asked to see the bedroom. Daniel led her upstairs. The room was large and minimally furnished. A king-sized bed centered against the far wall, a dresser, and a reading chair in the corner. The floor was carpeted in light gray. Everything appeared orderly, almost staged. Melissa's body had been removed by the medical examiner's team, but the bed remained unmade, the comforter pulled back to reveal white sheets beneath. Alvarez noted the absence of any signs of struggle. No overturned furniture, no items knocked from the nightstands, no defensive scuffs on the walls or carpet. Melissa's phone sat charging on her nightstand. Her reading glasses rested beside it, folded neatly. Alvarez's initial impression was that the scene didn't match the circumstances. A healthy 34-year-old woman didn't simply stop breathing overnight without cause. There were no pill bottles on the nightstands, no alcohol in sight, no paraphernalia that might suggest accidental overdose or suicide. The room felt too clean, too undisturbed. She requested a full autopsy and toxicology screen, then turned her attention back to Daniel. She asked if Melissa had been experiencing any health complications with the pregnancy. Daniel said she'd been seeing her obstetrician regularly, and everything had been progressing normally. Her last appointment was 2 weeks prior. She'd had some morning sickness in the first trimester, but nothing serious. She'd been exercising less as the pregnancy advanced, but was otherwise active and healthy. Alvarez made note of the doctor's name, Nathan Cole, and asked for contact information. Daniel provided it without hesitation. Before leaving, Alvarez asked one more question. Had Melissa seemed upset or anxious recently? Daniel paused for the first time during the interview. He said she'd been quieter than usual over the past week, maybe a little withdrawn. He'd attributed it to pregnancy hormones. She hadn't mentioned anything specific, and he hadn't pressed. Looking back, he admitted, he probably should have asked more questions. The preliminary autopsy was conducted on February 9th by Dr. Philip Tan, the Arapahoe County medical examiner. Dr. Tan had performed over 3,000 autopsies during his 22-year career, including hundreds of suspicious deaths. He began with an external examination of Melissa's body. She measured 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 143 pounds. She appeared well-nourished and showed no signs of chronic illness. Her abdomen was distended, consistent with 23 weeks of pregnancy. There were no visible bruises on her torso, arms, or legs. No defensive wounds on her hands or forearms. No lacerations or abrasions. But when Dr. Tan examined her eyes and face more closely under magnification, he found petechial hemorrhaging tiny pinpoint bursts of blood vessels in the whites of her eyes and the skin around her eyelids. He examined her neck and found additional petechiae in the soft tissue beneath the skin, along with faint linear pressure marks on both sides of her throat, just below the jaw. The marks were subtle, barely visible to the naked eye, but under ultraviolet light they became more distinct. The lack of visible bruising suggested the attack had been brief but forceful. Compression applied until loss of consciousness occurred, and then maintained long enough to cause death. Dr. Tan estimated the strangulation lasted between 2 and 4 minutes, based on the pattern of hemorrhaging and the absence of deeper tissue damage. Manual strangulation typically required sustained effort. The human neck contains strong muscles and cartilage that resist compression. The fact that Melissa showed no defensive injuries indicated she'd either been incapacitated before the attack began or had been caught completely off guard, unable to mount a struggle before losing consciousness. Dr. Tan performed an internal examination and found no signs of trauma to the trachea or hyoid bone, which sometimes fracture during violent strangulations. The thyroid gland showed mild hemorrhaging. The lungs exhibited pulmonary edema consistent with asphyxia. Toxicology screens came back clean: no alcohol, no recreational drugs, no prescription medications beyond prenatal vitamins. The fetus, measured at 23 weeks and 2 days, showed no developmental abnormalities. Death had occurred as a direct result of maternal oxygen deprivation. Dr. Tan estimated time of death between 10 p.m. on February 7th and 1 a.m. on February 8th, based on body temperature, rigor mortis progression, and stomach contents. Melissa's last meal, a salad with grilled chicken, had been partially digested, suggesting she'd eaten approximately 3 to 4 hours before death. That timeline aligned with Daniel's statement that she'd returned home from her yoga session around 8 p.m. The official cause of death was listed as asphyxiation due to manual strangulation. Manner of death: homicide. Alvarez returned to the Harper home the following afternoon with a search warrant. She brought a forensic team to process the bedroom and surrounding areas. They photographed the bed, collected fibers from the sheets, and examined the carpeting for trace evidence. They found no blood spatter, no hair that didn't belong to Daniel or Melissa, and no fingerprints that suggested a third party had been present. The bedroom closet contained Daniel's work clothes and Melissa's athletic wear. A laundry basket in the bathroom held towels and shirts, none with visible staining. The scene was clean, almost sterile. Daniel agreed to a formal interview at the Aurora Police Department on February 10th. He arrived with a lawyer, but waived his Miranda rights. Alvarez led the interview, joined by Detective Marcus Liu. She asked Daniel to walk through the evening of February 7th in detail. He repeated the timeline he'd given 2 days earlier. Left a work site in Centennial at 7:45 p.m., stopped for takeout at a Thai restaurant on South Parker Road, arrived home at 9:35 p.m., ate dinner while reviewing project documents, went upstairs at 11:10 p.m., and fell asleep by 11:30 p.m. Melissa had been in bed reading when he came up. They spoke briefly about her day. She said she'd had a yoga session that evening and felt exhausted. Daniel said he didn't think anything of it. Alvarez asked about the yoga sessions. Daniel said Melissa had started taking private lessons in December through a gym called Peak Performance Fitness. She went twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Alvarez asked if he knew the instructor's name. Daniel said he didn't. Melissa handled her own schedule. When Alvarez asked about the pregnancy, Daniel's expression didn't change. He said they'd been trying for over a year and were relieved when Melissa finally conceived. He planned to convert the spare bedroom into a nursery. He hadn't gotten around to it yet. The interview lasted 90 minutes. Alvarez couldn't identify a single contradiction in Daniel's account, but she also couldn't ignore the autopsy findings. Someone had strangled Melissa Harper, and the person with the most access and opportunity was her husband. The problem was motive. Daniel showed no signs of rage or instability. He had no history of domestic violence. Colleagues described him as methodical and even-tempered. His phone records showed no suspicious activity, no unexplained calls or deleted messages. His financial records were equally unremarkable. Alvarez shifted her focus to Melissa's life. She contacted Dr. Nathan Cole, Melissa's obstetrician, and requested medical records with a subpoena. Dr. Cole confirmed that Melissa had been receiving standard prenatal care since early September 2022. At her most recent appointment on January 24th, she had requested a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. The test used cell-free fetal DNA from a maternal blood sample and compared it to a paternal sample. Dr. Cole explained that such requests were uncommon, but not unheard of. Melissa had provided a cheek swab from Daniel along with her own blood. The results came back on February 3rd. Daniel Harper was not the biological father. Alvarez obtained the paternity test results through subpoena. Daniel Harper's genetic profile showed 0 matches with the fetal DNA. Probability of paternity, 0%. Melissa had picked up the results on February 6th, the day before her death. Dr. Cole's assistant reported that Melissa sat motionless in the waiting room for nearly 5 minutes after reading the report. then left without speaking. Alvarez now had motive, but needed proof Daniel had known about the results before the murder. She returned on February 17th with a warrant for his electronic devices. Forensic analysts processed them over 4 days. On January 28th, Daniel had logged into Dr. Cole's patient portal using Melissa's saved credentials and downloaded the paternity test file at 11:47 p.m. He'd opened it 17 times between then and February 7th, including twice on the morning of the murder. Browser history showed searches beginning immediately after: NIP test accuracy, Colorado divorce law adultery, then darker queries on February 1st, manual strangulation time to unconsciousness, how long hold breath before brain damage, strangulation death forensic evidence. He'd visited medical sites explaining asphyxiation, mechanics, read crime investigation forums, watched YouTube videos on applying chokeholds. All searches used private browsing, but forensic software recovered incompletely deleted cache data. On February 1st, Daniel created an encrypted Proton Mail account and emailed Ryan Mitchell requesting gym surveillance footage, claiming to be a concerned family member. Mitchell declined and forwarded the message to Melissa, who dismissed it as spam. Daniel then visited Peak Performance Fitness on February 4th during business hours, touring the facility. That evening, he returned at 8:47 p.m., using his member keycard. Security footage showed him entering the administrative office for 18 minutes. Mitchell discovered the breach on February 7th. Multiple archived video files from January had been accessed remotely at 9:02 p.m. on February 4th. The footage showed Melissa and Lucas in repeated intimate contact during January sessions. Digital forensics confirmed Daniel transferred the files to a USB drive, then viewed them 21 times on his home laptop. The final viewing, 9:14 p.m. on February 7th, approximately 1 hour before Melissa's estimated time of death. Detective Alvarez interviewed Lucas Reed on February 18th at the Aurora Police Department. Lucas arrived voluntarily with an attorney, visibly nervous throughout the 2-hour session. Lucas confirmed he'd been working with Melissa since mid-December 2022. She'd booked her first session after seeing his Instagram post about mobility training. The initial sessions were professional yoga flows, hip openers, shoulder exercises. By early January, the dynamic shifted. Melissa stayed after sessions to talk, sharing that her marriage felt distant and her husband was emotionally unavailable. Lucas, recently out of a 3-year relationship, found her attention flattering. They met for coffee on January 10th, dinner on January 15th. The physical relationship began on January 19th, after drinks at a hotel bar near the airport. Over the following weeks, they met 6 more times outside training sessions at Lucas's Capitol Hill apartment, on hiking trails, for brunch. They communicated through an auto-deleting messaging app and avoided social media. Melissa never mentioned Daniel explicitly, and Lucas didn't ask. He assumed the marriage was ending. Lucas said he didn't know Melissa was pregnant until Alvarez informed him. When shown the paternity test results, confirming he was the biological father, he requested a break to consult his attorney. He then provided a DNA sample and consented to phone and laptop searches. Forensic analysis confirmed deleted messages, with metadata showing regular contact between January 10th and February 6th. Melissa's last message, sent after picking up the paternity results. "Need to talk soon. It's complicated." Lucas responded, "Whenever you're ready, here for you." Melissa never replied. Lab results confirmed Lucas as the biological father with 99.99% probability. Between February 3rd, when Daniel learned definitively the child wasn't his, and February 7th, he had planned Melissa's death. The method was deliberate. Manual strangulation required proximity and sustained pressure, an act that couldn't be committed impulsively or from a distance. It required calculation. The investigation hit its first significant obstacle when Daniel's lawyer filed a motion to suppress the digital evidence, arguing that the search warrant had been overly broad and that accessing Melissa's medical records without her explicit consent violated patient privacy laws. The motion was denied, but it delayed proceedings by 6 weeks. During that time, Alvarez worked to establish a concrete timeline for the night of February 7th. Cell tower data placed Daniel's phone at the worksite in Centennial until 7:52 p.m. GPS from his vehicle showed him at the Thai restaurant on South Parker Road at 8:11 p.m. He arrived home at 9:38 p.m., 3 minutes later than he'd originally stated. Alvarez cross-referenced those times with Melissa's movements. Her phone had pinged a tower near Peak Performance Fitness at 6:04 p.m., and remained in that vicinity until 7:46 p.m. She'd then driven directly home, arriving at 8:03 p.m. That meant Melissa had been alone in the house for approximately 90 minutes before Daniel returned. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On March 22nd, a neighbor named Elaine Brooks contacted the Aurora Police Department. Brooks lived 2 houses down from the Harpers and had been out of town during the initial investigation. She'd returned home on March 20th and heard about Melissa's death from another neighbor. Brooks told Alvarez she'd seen something unusual on the evening of February 7th, but hadn't thought much of it at the time. She'd been walking her dog around 10:15 p.m. when she passed the Harper residence. The upstairs bedroom light was on, and through the partially open blinds, she saw 2 figures. She couldn't make out details, but the positioning suggested an argument, one person standing, the other seated or reclining on the bed. Brooks hadn't heard voices, but the body language struck her as tense. She continued walking and didn't see anything after that. The account contradicted Daniel's claim that he and Melissa had exchanged a few words and gone to sleep by 11:30 p.m. Alvarez brought Daniel in for a 3rd interview on March 28th. This time, he invoked his right to remain silent. His lawyer issued a statement denying any involvement in Melissa's death and suggesting that the investigation had focused prematurely on Daniel while ignoring other potential suspects. The statement didn't name alternative suspects or provide evidence to support the claim. Prosecutors filed charges on April 5, 2023. First-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Daniel Harper was arrested at his workplace and held without bond. The case went to trial in September. The prosecution's argument was straightforward. Daniel had discovered his wife's infidelity and the false paternity through surveillance footage and medical records. Faced with public humiliation and the collapse of his marriage, he chose violence. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial. Yes, Daniel had accessed the paternity results and the gym footage. Yes, he'd researched strangulation methods, but research wasn't action. The prosecution couldn't place Daniel's hands on Melissa's throat. There were no witnesses to the actual act, no confession, and no physical evidence directly linking him to the strangulation. The trial lasted 13 days. The prosecution called 23 witnesses, including Dr. Cole, Lucas Reed, Ryan Mitchell, and Elaine Brooks. Forensic analysts testified about the digital evidence. Dr. Tan explained the autopsy findings and the mechanics of manual strangulation. The defense focused on reasonable doubt, pointing out that Melissa could have been killed by an unknown intruder, or even by Lucas Reed, who had both motive and access. Lucas's DNA wasn't found at the scene, but the defense argued that didn't exonerate him. It simply meant he'd been careful. On September 29th, jury returned a verdict: guilty on both counts. Daniel Harper was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He filed an appeal in November, arguing ineffective assistance of counsel and judicial error in the admission of the paternity test results. The appeal was denied in February 2024. Lucas Reed left Colorado shortly after the trial and declined requests for interviews. The yoga studio at Peak Performance Fitness was converted into a general fitness space. Ryan Mitchell upgraded the gym's security protocols and added real-time monitoring alerts for after-hours access. Daniel Harper remains incarcerated at the Colorado State Penitentiary in Cañon City, where he has maintained his innocence in all correspondence with family members and legal representatives.